As many of you know, I spent the past January reviewing every DreamWorks Animation movie released up to this point in time. So it's time to stop and rank all 42 DreamWorks animated films from the worst to the best. Yes, there are 42 of them. I guess until their next movie comes out, DreamWorks really is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Well, let's get started. Coming in at last place at number 42 is Shark Tale. The animation in this movie is ugly and unpleasant, with a plot that not only directly rips off Dragonheart, it also assumes kids have seen The Godfather, because that's essentially what this movie is spoofing. Jack Black and Will Smith are two very funny, very charismatic actors normally, but in this film they're given nothing to work with and are incredibly unfunny. Number 41, Antz, a movie that was made because the head of DreamWorks Animation was petty and bitter that he got fired from Disney, so he made this movie to make it seem like Disney copied him with Bug's Life. The animation in this movie is ugly, the tone is cynical and mean, and it's very clearly geared towards adults because this movie is borderline PG-13 with the innuendo and profanity. The edginess of the film doesn't feel natural, it feels forced, and most of this movie is just unpleasant. Number 40, Shrek the Third. After a fantastic sequel with Shrek 2, this is a huge step backward. This is a lazy film with the bare minimum of effort put into it. There's almost no energy to this movie, none of the jokes land, and while it does have a fun idea of Prince Charming teaming up with other fairy tale villains, most of the movie just rehashes the same message as the first one, but doesn't do it in as clever of a way. Eric Idle's in this film, and he's normally pretty funny, but nothing he says in this film is funny, and that's a huge crime too. Number 39, Home. When the main character of the movie becomes very annoying after the first 5 minutes, that's a huge problem. The main character's shtick is only one or two jokes that are repeated over and over, which grows tiresome, and Rihanna plays a character in this movie, and while DreamWorks having celebrities voice characters is nothing new, the film uses Rihanna and her songs as lazy segues in between scenes, and it feels like you're listening to 30-second previews of her songs on iTunes. The only good thing about this movie is Steve Martin is the villain. He provides some laughs, but overall I find this movie to be loud, chaotic, and annoying. Number 38, The Boss Baby Family Business. If you ever feel stupid, just know that a bunch of people of DreamWorks collectively decided that instead of doing a sequel to Megamind or Monsters vs. Aliens, they decided no, the world desperately needed a sequel to Boss Baby. I find it funny that the villain in this film was voiced by Jeff Goldblum because for DreamWorks, this movie is pretty much the epitome of...
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should.
There are only like one or two jokes that work, and the plot is pretty all over the place. This movie overall is just bland with hardly any creativity to it. Number 37, The Boss Baby. How this got nominated over the Lego Batman movie, I'll never know.
You've made a huge mistake.
While it does have good animation and does have its cute moments, the rules of the film are inconsistent, and the entire movie is based on a one-joke premise. Alec Baldwin's voice coming out of a baby. That's funny for about 5 minutes, but then it gets old. It's a perfectly watchable, cute movie, but doesn't really have a lot to offer. Number 36, The Croods, a very forgettable movie that just feels like an inferior version of the Flintstones. Nothing about this movie particularly stands out. The characters and plot are mediocre, which is both surprising and disappointing, considering that this is from the same director as How to Train Your Dragon. It's well animated, but very bland and forgettable. Number 35, The Croods, A New Age. It's about the same level as the first one for me, but I put it up slightly higher because I did enjoy Nick Cage's dynamic with Peter Dinklage. They were kind of funny in this film, but again, nothing about the plot or characters of this movie is particularly memorable. Number 34, Spirit Untamed. Instead of expanding on the ideas of the first Spirit, which was an epic western about breaking free, this is just a generic girl and her horse movie. The transition from 2D animation to CGI is pretty jarring, and every character looks like they're from a Barbie movie. The plot is boring, and it just feels like it was made to sell toys to 6-year-old girls who are into horses. Number 33, Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. What's great about this film is it continues to expand on the ideas of the previous two films and keeps the characters evolving. The villain in this movie is delightfully despicable and a ton of fun. However, the film does suffer from too many liar reveal cliches, and even though the movie is called Madagascar 3, they're not even in Madagascar in this one. They're in a circus, which is a weird direction for the franchise to go. However, they do take full advantage of that aspect by giving us a film that is bright, colorful, and vibrant, and closes out each story on a nice little note. Number 32, Kung Fu Panda 3. Still a pretty decent film, but easily the weakest of the trilogy. J.K. Simmons is great as the villain and is a ton of fun and has really cool powers. The martial arts sequences are well choreographed, but the plot just feels like DreamWorks going back to the tried and true method of meet the parents of the main character. The pacing of the film is a bit rocky, it feels like there's a lot of filler, and it feels like they're setting up a romance between Po and another panda, but it never goes anywhere. So a decent way to close out the trilogy, but it's a bit shy of earning its black belt. Number 31, Madagascar Escape to Africa. This isn't as clever as the original, but it's still pretty good. Again, much like a lot of the DreamWorks sequels, this is the plot template of meet the parents of one of the main characters, and to some degree the film also borrows a bit from films such as The Lion King and Joe vs. the Volcano. That being said, the animation of this movie is still very vibrant. The characters move very quickly and are fun to watch. King Julian has some very funny lines in this movie as the film plays up the satire of his dictatorship. The characters do get more development in this film as they each learn something about themselves. For example, Melman and Glory are on a search for love, Marty finds other zebras, and Alex is pressured into joining his pride. The penguins are also just as funny as they were in the first film, which is great because usually sequels take the comic relief side characters and expand their roles so much that it ruins them, but they're in this film for just the right amount of time. The writing character-wise is a bit stronger, but overall the plot does feel a bit too familiar. Number 30, Abominable. A film that, while it is entertaining, still for the most part is kind of generic. Overall, the plot is just E.T. but with a Yeti. That being said, there are a lot of creative moments in this film. There's a forest of giant blueberries, the Yeti can do some really cool stuff, and I'll admit I didn't see the villain twist coming. The true villains of this film were pretty well concealed, and I didn't really see the surprise regarding another character not being what they appear to be either. But overall, the film's pretty safe. The humor isn't anything special, and like I said, we've seen the kid finds a creature and has to get the poem plot before, and even the Yeti in the film is kind of generic. He doesn't really stand out, he's just the typical creature that acts like a dog, but isn't really a dog trope that we've already seen a bazillion times. There was effort put into it, there's certainly a lot of gorgeous animation, and while the film isn't an abomination, it's not really all that memorable either. Number 29, Joseph, King of Dreams, a direct-to-video movie that is still pretty great. It has powerful songs, great acting, and tells the story of Joseph in a simple yet accurate way. I give very high marks to this movie, it's just the other ones higher on this list are better. I don't really have any major problems with this movie, I don't really have any major gripes with this movie, it's just I think the other ones subjectively are better. Number 28, Road to El Dorado, a fun adventure with catchy songs, two very funny main characters, and a pretty solid story. Now, there are a few things I have problems with. For example, it's never explained why the civilization just immediately jumps to the conclusion that the two main characters are gods. They show up and are worshipped, and the two main characters decide to just go along with it, but it's never explained why they think this. That's kind of important info. Another thing is the third act does have kind of the cliche buddy movie stuff of they have a fight, but you know they're going to be friends again by the end of the movie. Also, the songs, though they are fantastic, serve more as narration like Phil Collins did for Tarzan, except for one song that's sung by the main characters, which feels a bit inconsistent. But this is still a fun adventure, and the two main characters work very well off each other. Their comedic timing is great. They're very snappy. So even though it has a few plot holes and cliches, I still think this film is golden. Number 27, Over the Hedge. A pretty solid entry to the DreamWorks Animation library. I didn't love it, but I was entertained enough. The plot is a bit overly familiar, but the voice cast is actually really solid, and when they let the voice cast do their thing, you end up with some scenes that are pretty golden. There's a possum voiced by William Shatner, and the animation on his overacting is hilarious. And a lot of the jokes in this movie are actually pretty smart. It shows things that are everyday occurrences for us humans, but it shows how to a bunch of forest animals this could seem really strange. There's a scene where they see a family praying over their dinner, and they immediately jump to the conclusion that humans worship food. But also, for every hilarious and smart joke, it seems like there's a couple of jokes that didn't land as well and just kind of had me scratching my head. And honestly, the two human antagonists in this movie are kind of generic and boring. The bear, who's voiced by Nick Nolte, is a far more threatening, far more interesting villain, and the two main antagonists, who are voiced by Thomas Hayden Church and Allison Janney, are kind of run-of-the-mill. Don't get me wrong, Thomas Hayden Church does get a few laughs in this movie, but the way they wrote his character, again, just kind of bland. There's not much to him. He seemed kind of one-dimensional. This is a film that really takes advantage of the animation medium, however. The animation is so quick and full of energy that it's highly entertaining. A lot of the visual gags are really clever, so this movie entertained me enough that I would recommend it, but it's nothing special or fantastic. It's just kind of a fun way to kill time. Number 26, Turbo. A pretty creative film with some great voice acting and banter, especially between Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson. The plot does feel at points like it's borrowing a bit from Ratatouille and even Cars to some degree, but more so Ratatouille. And I didn't really think the film needed a twist villain and kind of comes out of nowhere, and I don't think it worked. I think the villain of the movie collectively was just society telling Turbo or Theo that he can't do it, and then he proves them wrong. I don't think making one of the characters a villain out of the blue worked, and nothing about this was foreshadowed or built up. But overall, this is still a very fun film with bright colors, well-done animation, and fantastic voice acting. Number 25, Madagascar. Not fantastic, but it's decent. It has a good cast who have a lot of energy with each other, it's animated pretty well, and the plot does have a couple of good twists. As great as the cast and main characters are in this movie, though, the standout characters of the film are the penguins. They are hilarious and clever. They act like spies, Navy SEALs, and ninjas, and it's done in a very creative way. The penguins want to escape the zoo for Antarctica, so they come up with all these elaborate plans to get there, and when they finally arrive, it's the funniest joke in the movie and is well worth the build-up. The film also has a few other good side characters, such as a lemur played by Sacha Baron Cohen, and while his performance can be a bit mixed, there are a few times where he can also be really funny. I didn't care for a lot of the lower brow humor that the DreamWorks films seem to have, but the jokes that land really land. It's not as good as some of DreamWorks' previous entries, but it's still entertaining and worth a watch. Number 24, B-Movie. You'll probably only like this movie if you like Jerry Seinfeld, because the big problem with this movie is it feels like they just had Jerry Seinfeld write a bunch of jokes and gags that he wanted to do, and then try to work a plot around the jokes and gags. Plot-wise, it has too many things going on, but the script still has very sharp and witty writing, even if plot-wise it doesn't know what it wants to be. Number 23, Kung Fu Panda. Jack Black finally gets his time to shine in a DreamWorks film after the disaster that was Shark Tale. This time around, Black is actually given humorous material to work with and does a great job. The animation is also well done, with some very fast-paced martial arts sequences and great scene lighting. However, plot-wise, the film does feel a bit familiar, as it is essentially the hero's journey story, and feels very reminiscent of other films like the original Star Wars. There's even a few similarities in the characters, as the main character is stuck in a situation he does not want to be, just like Luke Skywalker. His mentor dresses in all brown, just like Obi-Wan. There's a wise old green character, just like Yoda. And the villain, of course, being the former protege of the main character's master, that's Anakin, Darth Vader. All these story beats feel very familiar, but the film does have a fair amount of humor, most of it slapstick, and well-written dialogue that is thought-provoking. Number 22, Shrek Forever After. This film actually has a great setup by transporting Shrek to an alternate timeline where he never existed, and you see what happened to everyone in his life as a result of that. Rumpelstiltskin is a really fun villain. He's conniving, but he also has his moments where he can be really funny. Now, the way it goes about the first act to get to the It's a Wonderful Life story isn't done as well as I think it could have been. Shrek does act like a pretty big jerk at the beginning of the film, and I'm sorry, but Fiona calling him out on it was entirely in the right. But once it does start the It's a Wonderful Life stuff, there's actually some pretty fun ideas. Fiona being an ogre warrior who got herself out of the tower actually makes a lot of sense. Puss in Boots being her pet cat who's gotten lazy and soft from years of being pampered is a really funny idea, though I do feel that gag was a bit overused. That's funny for like one or two scenes, but it very quickly becomes the only joke for that character. And having the Pied Piper be a bounty hunter who has a flute that has a different setting for whatever he's hunting that causes him to dance, that was so creative. Now, I do have a couple of issues with the film, mostly because when you really look at it, the overall goal is basically the same as the first one. Shrek has to get Fiona to fall in love with him, get Donkey to be his best friend, overthrow the evil king. Okay, if the story had been a little bit more creative with the overall goal, this could have maybe surpassed Shrek 2, but as it stands, it's still a perfectly fine film despite a few story issues. Number 21, Trolls. This movie is delightfully creative with an incredibly infectious energy, and is actually some of the hardest and most often I've laughed while watching a DreamWorks film. I think mainly the reason I like this movie so much is it does kind of remind me of Fraggle Rock a bit, with a little bit of dose of the Smurfs thrown in for good measure. I thought the jukebox musical element was used in some creative ways, and like there's a scene where they're introducing it to the villains, and because the villains are all gloomy, they're singing the song Clint Eastwood by the Gorillaz. There's a scene where the characters sing Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. There's some really good song choices in this film. There's also a really sweet love story about someone who's a maid for the prince, who's the villain of the movie, and how she's in love with him. And I thought that love story was really sweet. I actually left this movie with a smile on my face. Something about this movie just really resonated with me. Number 20, Trolls World Tour. The plot to this one is even better than the first one. This time, instead of just doing pop songs that explores different genres of music, and each music kingdom is uniquely designed and memorable. The songs are catchy, the story is really fun, but character-wise, to some degree, I do think there's not a lot of character development, because it does seem like Branch and Poppy haven't really changed all that much from the first movie. They do feel kind of the same. Number 19, Puss in Boots. A fun western set in the world of a fairy tale. Antonio Banderas works very well off of each of his co-stars. The idea of making Jack and Jill this Bonnie and Clyde duo was really creative, and this film has a ton of energy and is thoroughly entertaining, but it doesn't really feel like it's all that connected to the other Shrek movies. It kind of feels like its own thing. Number 18, Rise of the Guardians. A film that brings us a fresh new take on child and mythical figures such as Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. The main character, Jack Frost, is given a fantastic character arc. The villain of the Boogeyman is well acted and is really scary. It's got a lot of fun ideas, and it's kind of a shame it flew under the radar. Number 17, Mr. Peabody and Sherman. A fun and somewhat educational film. The new CGI look of the characters is well animated, the voice acting is very well done, but a couple of issues I have with it are there aren't really any consequences for the Gorilla Bully Sherman, and it kind of repeats the myth that if someone bullies you, it means they like you, and I don't think that's something we should be teaching kids. And the third act, it feels like they didn't really know what to do, so they just kind of directly ripped off Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So while the script is smart, especially for history buffs, those are my issues with it. Number 16, Captain Underpants. I think Mr. Krupp at the end of this film summed it up best. It's lowbrow, childish, and has the lowest form of comedy, potty humor, but it's actually pretty funny. The animation style is incredibly unique and is unlike any of the DreamWorks films. This movie is really smart and has a lot to offer for adults as well, and it replicates the spirit and tone of the books perfectly. Number 15, Chicken Run. The fact that this movie is about chickens trying to escape their farm and outsmart the farmer, and they didn't call it Chicken Coo, is a missed opportunity. This movie is really clever. It's well acted, well written, and has an original story. The puns in this film are some of the smartest I've heard, and it's a lot of fun with memorable characters, sharp writing, and fantastic animation. The story really is just so out there and wacky, but yet it's played so dramatic and seriously, while at the same time still having a sense of fun. The movie all around is super entertaining, and there's certainly not much about it that's foul. Number 14, Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. A clever spoof and homage to old werewolf movies that has a lot of fun with its premise, providing all the classic tropes of a monster movie while not actually being scary because it is still a kid's movie, but it still has enough jokes for the older crowd, and honestly, everybody can enjoy this film. There are so many clever little bits and background gags as well as sharp dialogue. It provides slapstick and stuff like that for the kids while also having writing and jokes aimed at the older crowd. And it takes its premise about as far as it can without going too far with it. It has a lot of fun playing up its werewolf story, except the werewolf being a were-rabbit, so instead of people being attacked, it's vegetables being attacked. And there's a joke about a golden bullet, and the only thing that can kill a were-rabbit being 24 carats. And there are many other jokes, both visual and written, that you'll miss if you don't pay attention. My one issue with this film is the villain. He's a bit generic. He reminded me a bit too much of Gaston from Disney's Beauty and the Beast. But other than that one issue, this film is clever, hilarious, and absolutely smashing. Number 13, Flushed Away. This movie is wildly creative and inventive, especially with the animation. Almost everything is shot from the perspective of mice, which leads to some creative little moments and gags with everyday props and how they're used. There are also just a ton of background gags. There are so many hidden background references, Easter eggs, and jokes. And the entire cast of this movie is great, especially Ian McKellen as the villain. The way he says every single line is just so darn wildly entertaining, and the film also has a lot of sharp dialogue. My favorite side characters definitely have to be the slugs. They're basically the Minions before the Minions were a thing, and they provide some of the biggest laughs of the entire movie. There's a scene where a character is eating what he thinks is rice, and the build-up and reveal to this joke of what he's actually eating had me howling. And honestly, just like Captain Underpants, for a movie whose whole premise revolves around essentially bathroom humor, there's surprisingly very little of it. That is restraint. Number 12, Penguins of Madagascar. Normally, when you take the comic relief characters of the movie and give them a spin-off, it doesn't work, but this is an exception. The penguins are still just as entertaining as they were in the other movies. Benedict Cumberbatch gets a chance to let his comedic side shine through, and John Malkovich as the villain is given some of the funniest material in the whole movie. Number 11, Monsters vs. Aliens. This is sort of DreamWorks' attempt at making a Mars Attacks type movie where, while it's still his own thing, it's not quite a spoof, it doesn't quite cross that line. The writing is sharp, there's so many little quick lines of dialogue that come one after the other, the entire voice cast works very well off each other, and a lot of this movie is incredibly clever. It's satirical and smart. I do think the villain of the film is kind of weak, he's sort of played up as more of a joke, but that's also kind of what this movie is. It's meant to just be an homage to schlocky B movies from the 50s, and when it does that, it does it masterfully. This film is a monstrously out-of-this-world good time. And here you go, my top 10 DreamWorks films. Number 10, Kung Fu Panda 2, a worthy follow-up to the original. Poe actually goes through a lot of character growth, and there's actually some pretty heavy stuff in this movie. For one, themes of genocide. The villain, voiced by Gary Oldman, is incredibly sinister. He's even better than the villain in the first film. The action in the film is incredibly fast-paced and well-animated. Poe's journey in this film is well-written and emotional. The writing of this film is just excellent. And even though it still has moments of comedy, it's not afraid to be mature. Everything the first film did right, this film does even better. Number 9, Shrek. A clever, sharp, and irreverent setup of fairy tales that at the same time has a lot of heart. It plays with the well-known fairy tale tropes and does something clever and different with them, while still having a great message at its core. However, the message about not judging by appearances feels lost, since for every time they reiterate the message, they also make fun of the height of one of the characters. It's still fun, but it needed to get its message across better. Number 8, Megamind, an incredibly smart setup of superhero movies. The banter between Brad Pitt and Will Ferrell is absolutely hilarious, the script is wildly sharp, and it definitely stands out in a market that has now been overly dominated by comic book movies. Number 7, Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron. It's a pretty cool idea to do a western, but have it be from the perspective of a horse. There are some powerful and emotional scenes in this film. You really connect with and feel the emotions of this horse. Now, there are a few times where the narration is a bit unnecessary, and just letting the scene be as is would have been more effective, but there are also a few times where the narration is actually kind of clever. And yes, I will admit there were several times throughout this movie where I was holding back tears, mostly due to the score from Hans Zimmer, because my word, this is one of the most powerful scores I've heard in any animated film. This movie stirred a lot of powerful emotions in me because when I wasn't holding back tears, I was applauding, especially during the last 20 minutes because it's just that powerful. In addition, the 2D animation mixed with the 3D backgrounds are blended together incredibly well. The film definitely has a lot of spirit. Number 6, Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. A fantastic adventure with great animation and great performances all around. The dynamic between Brad Pitt and Catherine Zeta-Jones is memorable. The villain of the film was well acted and animated. And the story is exciting and fantastic. It's honestly a shame this never got a sequel because I would love to return to the world of this film. Number 5, How to Train Your Dragon, The Hidden World. Plot-wise, an absolutely perfect ending to the trilogy with a lot of emotion, maturity, and heart. However, the villain feels the same as the villain in the second one, but at the end of the day, this truly is one of the great DreamWorks films. Number 4, Shrek 2. This could have so easily been another forgettable animated sequel. This could have so easily been a disappointment. But no, not only does it expand on the ideas and characters from the first film, everything about this movie is conceivably better. It has a stronger story than the first one, and a big part of that is the clever way it satirizes fairy tale tropes by making the fairy godmother and Prince Charming, who are always the heroes of the fairy tales, the villains of the film. And not just plain joke villains. Fairy Godmother is one of the smartest, most conniving villains DreamWorks has put out. And the new character in this film, Puss in Boots, absolutely steals the show with a great back and forth with Donkey and is absolutely hilarious and fun. And the jokes in this film are also smarter than the first one. There's so many little background gags and quick little moments, and there's also still a lot of heart in this one too, with themes of sacrificing and changing for the person you love. It's one of the best sequels ever. Number 3, How to Train Your Dragon. A movie that, compared to a lot of DreamWorks' other films, is pretty serious. There's not a lot of comedy in this film. It's definitely a lot more mature. The story is rich and deep with a fantastic score to back it up. The characters are well fleshed out, and the emotions of this film are powerful. Number 2, How to Train Your Dragon 2. I love the first one, so I mean it when I say this is even better than that one. Hickey is given a strong character arc, the mythology and world building of the film are greatly expanded, And it gets really dark and serious at some points. And instead of just moving on from it, it lets the dark and emotional moments sit with you and let you feel the weight of what happened. But coming in at number 1 is the best DreamWorks movie is Prince of Egypt. Everything about this movie is just so big and epic. It has one of the darkest opening scenes in any animated film, similar to Hunchback of Notre Dame. The animation in this movie is just stellar. The lighting, the symbolism, the foreshadowing, and the songs are fantastic and powerful. This tells the story of Moses in a way that's easy to understand, but also doesn't shy away from the darker events of what happened. The framing of each shot is meticulous as well. Every shot in this movie is just absolutely beautiful. I can't think of a single thing about this movie I don't like. It tells the story of Moses in a dramatic way and does it perfectly. I consider Prince of Egypt to be one of the greatest animated films of all time, so it comes in at number 1. So if you're up to the challenge, share the ranking of the DreamWorks movies, or at least the ones you've seen, or you can do a top 10 list. I don't know. I know 42 films is a lot to rank. You can do it however you want. I look forward to seeing your lists, and I will see you next time.